All right. Cool. Well, so
Yeah.
I reached out to you because I know that you had done your studies in mythology. And I just realized all of a sudden I don't need to rebuild the wheel trying to look for these things. I could just reach out to you and see, see what you had to say. And so, how fun that we're having this spontaneous talk recording
Yeah.
here. And
Yeah.
then you mentioned you were talking about the hero's journey and the story. So just tell me what you meant, kind of right away from that. Start there.
Sure. Well, as you texted me, your interest in creation stories and I have more questions for you too, a lot. But I can just jump in with a little bit of basic background on the hero's journey. Um, so many people became much more, maybe many people in the West, in the United States, became more aware of mythology through Joseph Campbell. And he was one of the main developers of this idea of the hero's journey. And the this certainly had been around for a long time, of course, but he sort of his perception, at least especially when he, first wrote the book, The Journey, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, um, uh, which was pretty early in his career. Um, he saw that as being something that you could find across cultures, and which is wonderful and true. And also other mythologists over time have looked at that and said that can be kind of limiting, that the structure that he created, that he articulated as a with its stages, like the call to adventure and that kind of thing, and then going into the belly of the beast, it's a format that is definitely present in many myths, but there's more. It's also a very male oriented psychology framework. Oftentimes, the hero is striking out on their own, facing the wilderness of the world, whatever that might be, internally and externally, and going through um you know deep psychological processes, such as grabbing it.
Mosquitoes. You opened the door for 5 seconds here.
So the hero goes out and grabs the mosquito. And then the idea with Joseph Campbell's idea was that it was a full circle. So you grab the mosquito and you bring it home to the community and share. Get another one. So anyway,
Oh my God.
but that's not the only way that myths are expressed, or it's not the only um, psychological process that people go through with myths. There's been work on the concept of the heroine's journey. How is that different, from the hero's journey? There's a lot of people that have taken that in different directions. So I just wanted to kind of caveat that, because it's a way of looking at mythology that can be really helpful. And it's also helpful to realize that that's a view, a way, and there's many more, you
I
know.
love that. That's so important. Yeah, I mean, I just off the top of my head, when you asked what I was interested in, I just kind of threw that out there because I know that that's like a common,
Yeah.
terminology.
Yeah.
Um, and but I actually I remember when everyone was kind of hearing about Hero's Journey, and I kind of didn't really pay much attention to it. And then through doing hypnosis work and the subconscious, then of course Joseph Campbell and the symbolism came in, and so then I started to look into him, started to talk to my mom about it, and she said the same thing, like, all these things you're talking about are good, but they're very male perspective. Like, check out some of these women. So then she gave me some names of um, some of the women, you know, you
Yeah.
know their names. I can't remember off the top of my head, and I
Yeah.
didn't even like consider that. You know, I didn't even consider like that would be a male perspective. Of course it is, and it's valid, but I didn't even like consider it. So it's such a good
Well,
thing for us to recognize.
absolutely, because our culture is very male oriented, and a lot of the development of our ways of in Western culture, our ways of looking at myth and psychological processes um tend, they have a history that comes from a specific viewpoint um that tends to imagine, for instance, like, when we talk about the divine feminine, um it's a perspective of the divine feminine, like you can imagine, and we all experience this in different ways. Like the devouring mother is one really powerful female archetype. um and a lot of times in Western male psychology, I want to be specific in that because it's not necessarily all cultures, but in this one there is this quest to do battle with that which would swallow the ego. And so it's a matter of going into this whatever adventure it is and testing your strength against it, coming through trials, gaining something from that trial that you then like integrate into yourself, and in full circle, bring to the community as that final step that's important in the process. And that is it may be different for a different people of different gender identities or experiences, instead of that being a relationship between the ego and the unconscious, that there might be other ways of processing, you know but it's good, it's all good, right? One of the things I would recommend, there's an essay by Ursula Le Guin called The Carrier Basket Theory of Fiction,
Okay.
that he wrote, that was just lovely. You can find it online pretty easily. The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, where she's talking about, instead of the dramatic arc of, that there has to be a conflict, and so that you have this kind of build up to the conflict, that's where the drama comes to its peak, and then you might have the denouement and all that kind of stuff that we learned in English class. She's talking about, like, maybe novels don't need to be that. Maybe instead of that orientation of like the arrow, like we are following a linear path towards a, through a conflict to a conclusion. She's like opening it up to thinking like, instead we are gathering things. And she talks about, the history of sort of, the indigenous or Paleolithic history, where human beings were developing these first tools, and how important it is to have the arrow and the spear and the hunt and the story about the hunt and all the drama. But real nourishment comes from plucking potatoes and it's boring. you know but that's this, so it's really beautiful because she's so poetic, talking about, well, what does it mean to you know gather and gather and gather and gather and see the connections between things. But it's not so much of a matter of conquest, it's a matter of a sense of connectedness, you know
All right.
and she's
So
talking about that in terms of writing, as how she would go about that as a storyteller,
yeah,
developing her stories.
I love that. Sorry, I mean, I had to either cook in here and be too hot or open the door and then the mosquitoes have just, I just opened it 1 minute ago, so it's just
Well, I have another mosquito, my kid. Hi, mosquito kid.
Wow, very funny.
It's I'm on a recorded Zoom right now.
That's cool.
Pipe cleaners. You need to get into the thing. There's some old toothbrushes underneath the sink, the kitchen sink.
That's not really long enough.
Can you ask Aiden to help you?
Aiden's helping me. He doesn't know right.
I don't think I have any pipe cleaners.
Anything long and skinny.
A stick.
That's way
Um,
too hard on the stick.
There's on the top shelf of the window above the sink. There's a jar and it has the bottle brush in it. It also has a long brush thing, but I'd really want you to clean it out afterwards. Sorry about that.
it's okay. That's all good. I can edit. I can find it. I have to figure out how to edit stuff anyway. I can edit out some of this crazy fucking
Mosquitoes.
nonsense.
So what I want to ask you some questions because this will help me get a sense of what you're looking for.
Okay.
Like when you were saying, you're interested in stories and a connection with mythology for your Healing Roads work.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that work that you're doing and what your questions are, where myth comes into it for you?
Yes. So, first of all, I've always loved stories. I love a good storyteller. When I used to work at the Renaissance Fair, we had an amazing guy. You might have known him had you gone to the Renaissance Fairs.
Not a whole lot, unfortunately. I wish I did, but
I'm spacing on his name for a moment, which I feel bad about, but he was such an amazing storyteller, and he would just, all of us adults would just get, just curl up at his feet and just like listen for an hour and a half and just be enamored, nothing, like nothing else mattered while he was telling those stories. And they were epic, epic tales of like the Irish and the Scottish. And like, I had no idea that there was all this pantheon within within that culture. And he did it in a way where um, everything was exciting. It was all connected. And then there was always more. So it was like there was never an end.
Tomorrow I'll tell you about what happens next.
Yeah, and so I also feel like storytelling is just one of the most ancient ways of connection, keeping story, keeping entertainment, and keeping connection. I've had so many experiences where someone's telling the right story with the right vibe where we're all there, and we've experienced that at the mill many times.
Oh yeah.
So I love the magic of it, and and a good story written can get me there, close to what it is when you have that personal experience, which is more rare than common to have nowadays. And then I've seen so many storytellers like in my travels, and it's like everyone loves a good storyteller,
Oh
and
yeah, I know.
the amazing ways that cultures have developed these, like reenacting the stories, like in Indonesia and all over India, and all of the rituals, like, so to me, it's like, um, and I used to have some really great books, and just throughout moving, I've lost a lot of them. And then when I've looked for new ones, they don't have that scent, that feeling that I'm looking for, when you just want a good story, but like that old, they're they're telling you something poetically that actually is kind of dark, but is also the opposite of the light of life. And and so I just love that. And then as far as Healing Roads goes, it's like it's multi-dimensional um, like practice to help people connect in ways that I might be able to help them through my experience and what I've been like learning, right? So,
Mhm.
um, and a big part of that is hypnotherapy, um,
Mhm.
but
Remember that
it's not
includes
limited.
pipe cleaners. You can't do without it.
Okay, you'll have to just wait. Sorry.
Okay, and it's not limited to that, but I have found, so when I started with the hypnotherapy, they give you these scripts, right, that you like read from. And some of them are like really amazing and then some aren't. And then I started to learn about NLP. And then I've just started to do some of my own writing and realizing that there's an art to this and they've been doing it for ever all over the world in these different ways. And one of the ones that holds really strong for me, and I'm not exactly sure why, is
Hmm.
like an Inuit story. You might know this one where,
I'm sure.
yeah, where um, well, there's a couple things. One is that you you braid the women brush their hair and they brush it to brush the hair. Okay, so the young girl gets taken to the cliff and cut into a million pieces and thrown off into the ocean, and then all of her appendages and her everything turn into the seals and the this and the that. I don't know if I'm putting two stories together. And but then she ends up, living for eternity in the bottom of the sea, very upset. And one of the ways that you can calm her is by brushing her hair. And so the women will brush their hair, um, to try to keep her happy and the seas calm so that their fishermen husbands can go and be safe upon their return.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so that one always sticks with me when I think about, like, it's a brutal story. It's a brutal story, but the ocean is brutal. And if
Yeah.
that's where you're getting your food, you know, like that level of full connection into nature being real. It
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
really nourish you and it can really kill you. And
Yeah.
then whatever other phases of storyline that they were telling, could have
Yeah.
could have been like, don't run off with the man you love. You have to go with the man that might kill you. I don't know. Other levels of that. I don't know. So yeah, that
Right. 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 Yeah. The harshness of like the tearing apart and the, you know, like the murderous aspects of it, those are part of the human experience, and whether or not it's even referring to a murder, whether because sometimes people in mythological studies, sometimes people think, oh, these myths, they like evolve out of legends that might have evolved out of a historical thing, you
right.
know
Hmm.
but then there's other people that are like, no, they're speaking to common experiences. Whether we call that archetypes or not doesn't really matter, but they're just speaking a kind of core truth. It doesn't have to be based on an occurrence. And then there are aspects of things that like might be warning, like uh, you've heard of murder ballads, right? That's something in Appalachia and Ireland and other places like that, where there's whole long stories about, watch out, the guy's going to take you and be careful, kind of thing like that.
Yeah, I
There's
don't know
that
the
aspect
history.
too. What?
What's the history behind the murder ballads? I mean, I know the songs.
Well, um,
Like, what were they trying to do? Were they teaching a lesson? Is it just because it was a good story and dramatic?
I think both of those things, really. I think that's what's going on there, is like whenever when you hear them and you feel your response, it's like a thrilling story. And there's this like, oh shit, and then a lot of times, some of these murder ballads are about how the woman tricks the guy finally, you
Right.
know, and she gets away, and
Right.
so there's these moments where you're like, and sometimes she doesn't, and it's the song about how, she didn't get away, and that sucked, but I'm just saying that there's that kind of thing, but then there's also this, like, in that story, that's, I believe that's Sedna you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I'm sure there's many different stories for how Sedna came to be, and in her aspects of, you know, her despair and her anger and her, that energy that's kind of like, and you get just like, when you hear it, you feel it. You're like, yeah, at the bottom of an ocean is a really pissed off woman. you know, that makes sense,
Yeah.
Um, but what's interesting to me is, one of the things that is going on there is there's this relationship. It's teaching a relationship with the pissed off woman in the bottom of the sea.
Right.
It has to do with part of our bodies and this really magical aspect of humanity, our hair, but then the fact that it's women too, and women's connection with hair and water and emotion is really an interesting thing that comes up in a variety of different cultures in different ways. So I found that to be kind of like, wow, that's interesting that there's this a lot of times the mermaids, who are, the treacherous mermaids that are all over the place, but they're throughout Scotland and Germany. They might be in rivers, they might be on the ocean rocks, but a lot of times they come and they're brushing their hair, and that's how they lure the men who want to fall in love with them, and then they drown them.
Right.
So it's that relationship with the beautiful, seductive, and incredibly dangerous aspects of nature. you
Mm.
know
Huh. Yeah.
so
And that's the thing is like in your studies and your experience, what do you how do you feel and what do you think about, like, you know not to compartmentalize, but just kind of what do you how do you feel about how these stories developed, like it, you know what's your sense that it was, to tell a, like, were they being that deep on purpose? And if so, where did that purpose come from? And how did they do it so artistically and well? And how come I don't really see it nowadays? I feel like there's something that was coming. Maybe it's the same thing as like herbalism and shamanism. Like, there's just a level of like not as much static, more, connection. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Where?
well, I mean, in terms of where it comes from, it's such a core part of who we are as humans, and our I think that it's deeply related to language. I think the fact that we speak to each other and we convey to each other, and I mean, it's not like other animals don't. And in a lot of ways, if you get yourself out of your human exceptionalism and you think about it, like, why wolves have mythology, ravens have mythology, not just to us as like symbols or whatever, but with each other,
In
you
what?
know, so it's a way that human beings, I mean, story and symbol has been a part of who we are for beyond time. Like, it's always been there, you know. And I think that I think art has always been the way that we express it. um and where is it now? I mean, it is all around us. It's still very much happening. I think that if you stand back and look at what's happening, it does reflect what our world is, the state of our world right now, which is really really confused and fractious and conflictual, chaotic, um, and very much struggling with binary thoughts and trying to break out of it. And we're really, it's like, it's all there.
Yeah.
And and artists are still going to those deep places to find those core, like, what is, any one of us as artists are like, what is my truth here? What do I really have to express in this song, in this dance, in this, painting, in this story? um and um and I think that we are at this point where, so much the quest for us now is to find ways of healing our relationships, healing with each other, healing ourselves. And even those people who are in a lot of fear and holding on to forms that are safe, like how they believe the world should be, hierarchies that they think that hold things together, where God is on top and then the father and then the mother underneath everything. You know what I mean? All of that kind of like, this is the way things should be and we need to make you do our thing, you know? That's still, it's the same urge, you know? Um, although, I mean, it is, what I think is difficult right now is the struggle between control and, I don't know, maybe we call it allowance. I don't know what is the opposite of control. When we allow processes to happen, healing, like, are we trying to control the narrative? Are we trying to control the world? We're going to try to control other people to suit our image of the way things should be? Or are we in another kind of realm where we're, open to diversity, open to different ways of knowing, open to uncertainty, all of those kinds of things? Like, that seems like that's a lot of what is playing out right now, is socially, on a mythological level. Do you feel like?
Yeah, I do. I agree with what you're saying. And then what that makes me want to ask you is, have you found storytellers for this experience in time that resonate with you in the way that these ancient ones have?
um it's funny because I thought about, um earlier when you were mentioning, and I don't know why, uh I thought about a some folklorists who have been, you know discovering old folk stories and maybe telling them in new ways. um Maria Tatar is a really well-renowned folklorist. So I would look at her stuff, and I'm going to turn around and look at my book here, if I can find.
Trying, trying to kill another mosquito.
I'm
Maria
killing
Tartar.
mosquitoes. Let me see if I can find.
Did you say Maria Tartar?
Maria Tartar is one of them for sure. And then, this is the book I wanted to talk to you about, but there's another author. So if you can see this, it's backwards.
Uh huh. No,
The
I
Jinn,
absolutely see
do
it.
you
Oh,
see it right?
yeah. I don't know how, but I can. The Jinn
The
Nightingale.
Jinn and the Nightingale's Eye. These are like, retellings of, stories of old fairy tales that pretty powerful. And then let me look a little bit closer. I'm kind of snarled up in my wires. My wires are crossed. Uh,
I mean, I have to say that
oh yeah, this is it. This is intense. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter.
oh my god. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so that that is just referencing, have you heard the bluebird myth? The bluebird story?
No.
So yeah, that's a heavy one. And that's definitely about female empowerment and struggling in abusive situations and stuff like that. But she has a retelling of that that's really powerful. So there are people who are retelling. And in some cases, you might agree with where they're taking it, or you might not. You might be like, that's not gonna be helpful to me. So you got to pick and choose what feels the right way.
Right.
But Clarissa Pinkola Estes and the women who run with the wolves,
Yeah.
that had a huge amount of resonance for so many people,
Yeah.
because she's taking these old stories and she's like, look, this is us, we're in it,
Right.
and I feel that we can do that. We all have that capacity,
Absolutely.
so, and I think the more we do that, the better it is for everybody. We all need to do it.
Definitely. I think that one of the differences is that our communities, our circles, how we hear things and what we listen to is just completely different than, just the radius of the mountain range that you're in, or between the river and the mountain, and where you can get to safely by horseback, safely home
Mhm.
at night. It's completely different. Oh my God, this guy just wants to die. He actually doesn't want to die.
You're really funny.
Oh my God, I'm so awful. Um, so, I think that really changes. That changes a lot, But uh, your audience changes. It's like I feel so strongly about the audience and the entertainer being intertwined, that full experience. I feel like we've lost so much, like in festivals and big celebrations and with amplified music, you know what I mean? Like we've
Yeah.
lost the remembrance that the active listening is, that's like the full
Yeah.
circle, I mean, it's,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
so much is like we're just being talked at, or all these different things. I listen to podcasts, interviews, TED talks, like scientists, doctors, all day long, all day long. That's what I listen to, and
Oh
they're
yeah.
storytellers. I love them, they're great.
Yeah.
um and I listen to books on tape, but there is something about these older folk tales that are doing this thing. And I think, I do think that partly what they, what I think NLP is trying to tap into, and I don't know a ton about it, but I know it's some of the stuff that we get trained to use in hypnotherapy,
Mm-hmm.
um, was just, I don't know, naturally happening. I don't know where it came from, other than source and connection to life and nature was just in a completely different place than where we are now. So maybe it just really happened organically. I mean, they certainly were. Um, I mean, is there like documentation about where these stories came from and how they developed? I guess I'd like to know that. Is that a certain? Um,
Well, I think that there is. It depends on the story,
right.
you know. And as I said, that there's different ways of thinking about how myths arise. There are, and so that the other part of it is that the study of mythology has its own history, and it's a colonial history as well.
Right.
you
That's
know
right.
so but it's important to look at that and go, okay, yeah, this is where this comes from, because as well, I think Joseph Campbell has a great quote: mythology is the study of other people's religions. You know?
Right.
So it has been this way of diminutizing other people's religions. Well, we've got the true religion and you all have mythology. you know
Oh yeah, right,
And that's how it really started out in like the mid 1800s,
right.
um, as sort of like a offshoot or in tandem with anthropology and folkloristics and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So uh so
There's like
way
the
back at the
otherness.
beginning, pardon me?
There's it's kind of like the otherness, like
Yeah, it's othering or exotifying and all that kind of stuff.
right.
Um, so yeah, it's boy, there's a whole I could get into, that's like a rabbit hole I could get into. But as it's developed, so one of the things that was like this kind of rage in the Romantic era, the mid 1800s, kind of shifting to the Victorian era, was this um concept of there being like an original myth, that these myths sort of like that all the stories of the world are like bad copies of or something like that. If you trace them all back, you'll get to a pure original myth. So that was, and this is something that it's like it was the way people were thinking about certainly Western, philosophers and people like that were thinking about the world in a lot of ways like that, like as if there was some kind of like pure original culture that we all kind of come from, like the golden age kind of thing like that, which really it's its own mythology, right? um and then in that, so that was also coming along at the time that they were putting together linguistics, and they were realizing that they were right, that there is a family tree of languages, like for instance the Indo-European languages, and that you can trace them back to kind of core structures, right? But there's also lots and lots of other languages that don't fit within the Indo-European tree, but you can trace the connections between them. So it wasn't that they weren't wrong in that sense, but there was this kind of idealization of this like pure original kind of concept, and now people are like, no, that's not really it, because mythologies have these enduring truths that are continually self-renewing. So there is a there there's two main schools of thought. I'm sure there's more than this too, but the ones that I was really trained in was um the depth psychological concept, which is like the Jungian concept that Joseph Campbell also picked up on, which is this concept of like core archetypes of the human experience that are present in all of the mythologies. And they may be like super core, like mother and father, an old man, an old woman, like basic aspects of human existence that show up in patterns. Um, but they can get problematic because, for instance, a really good example of this is the concept of the trickster, which is developed within that framework, but it has a certain cultural coloring to it. And then, white Western male philosophers and mythologists were like taking that concept and applying it to other cultures and going, oh, that's a trickster, when the other culture, Native American culture, is like, no, that's not really what you guys think is going on, is not really what we feel is going on. So there's this that kind of imposition of archetypal structures that work within one framework from one perspective and trying to apply them to others that don't necessarily work. So there's a much more nuanced understanding since Campbell, because Campbell did a lot of the cherry picking. He was like a beautiful, I mean, like The Hero of a Thousand Faces is a beautiful book. And he's really mystical in his writings. I love his writings. They're really gorgeous. But he also takes a little bit of this myth and that, a little bit of that one, and a little of this one, and then he kind of creates a new story and he says, look, this is the hero's journey. And you can feel it, it like resonates and makes sense, but it's also taking certain aspects of stories outside of the context of the cultures in which they were actually reflections of, you know. So a lot of Native people are like, yeah, that's great, but it's not really, you know, you took like part of this Cherokee myth and you stuck it in with an Alaskan myth, and then you brought in something from Sweden, and what the heck did you create? Like it's a new thing, you know. um so now in terms of tracing, there's also what's called the dispersion theory, and some people are like really focused on this kind of anthropological, like, you know, you can trace Cinderella back to China. And so Cinderella, the earliest form you find of Cinderella, an oral form of Cinderella, you can trace it, and it came on the Silk Road to Europe.
Wow, I had no
You
idea.
know, and those things are cool. So, like, for instance, it is real, but it's not the entire story.
Right.
So the stories, like the Grail stories, the Northern European Grail stories that we all think about, like King Arthur and the Holy Grail, those are mixtures of a whole lot of different story structures, folklore, tales, and things like that came through the Crusades. So mixed with Christianity, mixed with Celtic lore, and had elements from, you know, even alchemy and and a lot of the Silk Road, you know, stories that were coming. So and it developed into a new thing, and that is true. This happens. It's like I don't know if you've ever had conversations. I would think this would be such a fascinating way to learn music and mythology, like how instruments move around and they become different, you know, and the music styles, and all of a sudden you introduce a 9/8 and all of a sudden it's in another land and it does a different thing, and you know,
Yeah.
and that does happen. That's like we do mix and match, and new things are created out of that. And whether or not you call it cultural appropriation has to do with that overlay of power dynamics.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
So it's a fascinating and complicated and not a straightforward or easy answer, you
Yeah.
know.
Uh-huh.
So where things come from is a huge question, and I feel like it is good to see. I think it's really good to look at mythologies and stories and fairy tales and all of that from kind of both lenses, to you know, if not even more, but just going, okay, where else do we see this, and when do we see it in time, and what are the different forms that it takes, and what are the sort of core elements of this given story, whatever it is. And then also, what is it speaking to us about? And in some ways we can only answer that for ourselves, really truly, because who we are now is really different from even who our ancestors were, let alone other people from other cultures that were telling those stories, you know.
True.
and and the point of the stories is that they're relevant in the moment, and they shift and change, like you're saying, that painting this picture of, like, you know, the audience that holds that space for the storyteller, and the storyteller is transmitting this, you know, precious lore into this container of receivers, and it's the reception that creates the giving, you know. And the meaning is created between and in the context of, like, snuggling together on the, you know, I could just feel it, you know, and smell it, that entire embodied experience,
Mm-hmm.
and that sense of wonder and that sense of connection. And that, you're right, we don't get that when we just get on podcasts,
Right. I
you
mean,
know.
we hardly, in my opinion, we hardly get it even at like festivals, which are our kind of current, way of celebrating, which is why I'm creating this like dance revival tent because I have this whole hope to kind of bring these elements that so many of these other cultures have with music, and like my hope is to like inoculate that back into our culture so we can like have a bit more connection than just this kind of what I find really not very fun and bizarre thing at festivals that a lot of people enjoy, just kind of floundering. And but I just think, hey, we can
Carry this a little further, you mean?
yeah, we can like bridge the gap here and kind of get more, connected in a really nice way. But I digress on that. I wanted to ask
Not
you.
at all. No, no, no. I feel like that really is because we're talking about the container. And I
Right.
think that's what you're talking about here is like, how can we nurture, recreate, but also, seek out, nurture, and create those spaces where that transmission can happen and those connections can happen.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And thank you. But it's like, and in that way, we can. When you say that, it makes me think, and in that way, we could start to become. We can tap back into that
Yeah.
full connection, that storytelling, that nature, that life. Just really like the life.
Yeah.
Makes me think about just I can't help but think about this. Um, there's like a study or what have you, where they're saying basically, the brain, um, can hold that maybe I don't know 7,300 symbols, and at one point people knew this plant meant this plant meant that, this, the clouds meant this, and more that probably senses that we don't even like know about right now.
Mhm.
And that now it's like, it's all the icons and the stores and all of that. And I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah, the
yeah,
brand.
but then they showed the page of the symbols. It was like 200 symbols, and I knew every single one of them. And I was just like, you know what? I'm talking about McDonald's, Adidas, Nikes, this, that. I knew every single one of them based off a symbol. And I thought, wow, like my brain has that capacity.
Yeah.
If I were raised somewhere else, if I was
Yeah.
raised outside of this, I have that capacity to
Yeah.
see a symbol, to have a thing, and just know exactly what it is. But right now, that's where that attention has gone. That's where that fuel source that is going to this totally a drain, just a drain,
Yeah. Well, right.
and
Right. Right.
it's
And conscious,
that.
they are consciously creating that,
Oh,
it's the whole point of it all. And interesting.
it's interesting, right? It's just like, I mean, there's just endless rabbit holes that we can go down later about all that. But just to stick with like, um, you know, when I asked you like, where do these stories come from, and it was so interesting how you just kind of mentioned. Of course, um, there's different ways to kind of follow the path. It's like,
Yeah.
follow the Cinderella path all the way down to um,
Right.
China, or are you gonna follow it through the Crusades, or through language, or the storyline, or geographically? And
Right.
I feel like your answer touched on my question, but what I'm so curious about is like where it comes from like within, not following the line, but again, I look for stories a lot. I've bought tons of like storybooks, mythology books, and it's been the rare one where I go, this is this feels like the old version. This feels, a lot of them I ended up giving them away because they just weren't quite.
Mm.
They didn't, they felt retold in a way where they lost the that magic of word, the magic of telling a story, teaching you a lesson, giving you a depth. And so I'm just so curious. I feel like I hear it a lot still in some of the like indigenous tales that I've found and read. Like I used to have some great trickster books. Those were great, and then some of the Inuit stories, were great. Um, and then some of the ones from India, those are just outrageous tales, that are so
Yeah.
complex and
Yeah.
phenomenal. And then
I
the
know.
Irish ones and Scottish ones that my friend told were, just um, same kind
Yeah.
of thing. But there was a way that it was done. There was a way that the words were scripted. There was a way, and I'm fascinated by that artistry, like
Yeah.
that ability, and then like where did that come from? Now it might not be something that can be labeled or described, but that's my question. Like that's
Well,
where,
it's interesting you asked that right now, because just in the last couple of days, I think I've been dwelling on that same question in
really
some, yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Um, I think what you're talking about is both uh capacity and skill, um and technique, or even discipline of, like, for instance, you as a dancer, the tradition that you have taught, that you're a carrier of, has it has a structure, right? It has boundaries. It has um core qualities to it, in music, in rhythm, in movement, and in personality, as it's been passed from one to another, um, and shared. And so I think that's true with stories as well. And so when a dancer can be so many different kinds of dancers. You can be a ballet dancer, you can be a belly dancer, you can be jazz hands. There's just so many, and all of those traditions have so much richness in them. And each of them require different kinds of body disciplines. Um, and I think that's probably true in storytelling as well.
Yeah.
And I think that there's probably some basic qualities as well, um, because storytelling does involve movement. We speak with our bodies, um, and also voice.
Yeah.
And so there's so much in that, like cadence and tone and repetition and rhythm. And then, how we may use our hands. Like, I'm talking to you now with my hands, and I could swirl them out way high, but I'm like constrained by the Zoom screen. So I'm like trying to talk with my hands in a small way next to my face, which, you know, to
Working.
illustrate the structure.
Right.
The way that we're expressing ourselves goes through a structure. It goes through a body, right?
Right.
And so who the body is part of the telling,
Yeah. Right.
and where we are is part of the telling,
Right.
and so
Mm.
there's the telling in that environment that you described, that I can just imagine, like a pool of people snuggled together on the dusty, you know little corner of the Ren Fair, where you can have that smell of like chai and dirt. I can feel it, like warm bodies and a cool breeze and some distant music somewhere, and and then this just sense of connection that's
Yeah.
just happening in this little bubble, you
Yeah.
know. um
And it changes time too, doesn't it? Like when there's
yeah,
a storyteller, it changes time the way that music can, or just an incredible. And it reminds me of when I was in Africa, like I was in Senegal, and they change time. When all of those rhythms that make no sense together until they lock and they become polyrhythmic, they open up the universe.
yeah,
And then that's why they're for certain gods and goddesses. I mean, it's particular, and
yeah,
energy changes and it shifts. And I
right.
think that happens
Because
here.
you're right, part of what you're doing is you're opening up, you're creating that container for El Duende, right? For
Yeah,
the spirit to come.
yeah,
And it's like a blessing if the spirit comes,
yeah,
and then recognizing when the spirit comes through us,
right,
and giving it honor.
yeah,
It's a huge part of what it is. I mean, that is just so deep in our bones.
yeah,
So for instance, like, your example of like, okay, Hindu stories, so complex. And I can like cherry pick a couple of wonderful images from Hindu mythology, but I will never fully understand it. I mean, it's so deep, you know?
yeah.
Um, but it doesn't mean that the images that come to me that resonate with me, like right now I'm thinking of Indra's net, and how in Indra's net, it's a picture of like the universe. And so it's like a four-dimensional spider's web. And at every juncture of where, you know, two threads meet each other, or more than two threads, there's a little droplet of dew that is a diamond. And that spreads as far as the universe can spread, every single connection. And within each diamond, it reflects every other diamond.
Hmm.
And that's the image of Indra's net. And it's just, that's, but that's, isn't that real? That's who we are,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
that sense of deep connection and reflection, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And
So,
yeah, go
so I can like take that as this image that I hold in my heart, as I resonate with that. Like that makes sense. But I know really not very much about Indra. And I don't know very much about the context of the rest of that story. And I can respect that I don't know that, and know that I'm not reflecting anything about, as I hold on to that symbol, you know, I know there's so much more that I can never know, and that's okay, you know?
right.
And so then, given that, there are stories that I choose to learn more about.
Which are what? What are the stories that you are most um, deeply into?
Well, right now I am moving into a phase of really learning more about my Scandinavian roots. And I am spinning, like spinning wheel spinning. And I am going to be getting a loom.
Nice.
So I have a friend who is, she is a teacher of um, Nordic shamanism. And um, what she teaches is about the Norns, the Nornir, who are more than the three. We think about the three Norns, like the three fates, and you maybe have seen images of, the one who spins, the one who measures the thread of your life, and the one who cuts the thread when it's time to
Right.
cut it. But there's many, many Norns in, but the main thing though is that, again, back to time. um Urda is past, Verdandi is present, and Skuld is future, but it's not linear. So, and I feel this when I'm spinning. I get into this trance where I can feel time moving into existence in any flow. Like I feel myself go into trance where I'm working with ancestral flows, and I find myself in, it's almost like in other times, doing work in other time frames. So I feel like there's just a lot to learn still about that. And spinning stories,
Yeah.
many different kinds of stories that have spinning wheels or spinning in them,
Right.
and also weaving, you know. So I feel like I'm like at the beginning of that phase for myself personally.
That's
And
amazing.
and I feel also, because when you were talking about how music changes time and stories change time, I feel like it's just interesting that you bring that up, because just in the last couple of days I've had these conversations about time, um and how I feel like we're in this moment right now when things are, I would say, like speeding up or something, or just becoming more complex or more layered. And it feels like it's acceleration of climate change, but it's also acceleration of other things that I don't know about. And it feels like time is elastic,
Mm.
and that we need to be in those spaces where we are working with that elasticity.
Mm.
And I feel like there's a lot of healing going on in reference to time. And I don't even know
Mm.
what else to say about that, except a friend of mine were talking about, and this morning we were talking about how we feel like we're being led. And maybe you feel this way too, like one step at a time. Like, I don't know where I'm going to put my foot down, but I'm just going to trust that spirit is going to guide me to where my next foot needs to be down. And then I lift this foot up and I don't know where it's going to go either. I'm just waiting to be guided to where do I lay my next foot down, right?
Right.
Doesn't
Yeah.
that feel that way? It's like, oh, there's so much is going on right now. So much is at play. So much is shifting. There's so much tide moving in. We were talking about feeling the, caught between Scylla and Charybdis. Have you ever heard of that phrase?
No.
Do you know anything about the Odyssey, the story of the Odyssey?
No, I just know the name.
Way long story, but there is one
Right.
portion of it. Odysseus is returning home from Troy after the war in Troy, and he's having a hard time getting home to his wife, whose name is Penelope, and she's a weaver. And he goes through all these crazy adventures. At one point, he is sailing between the rocks of Scylla, where the sirens are like calling to him, and lots of ships wreck on those rocks because the sailors cannot resist the call of the sirens. And Charybdis, which is on the other side, is this whirlpool that will suck you down into it.
Oh God.
So he has this like pathway to follow between, you know
Right.
just not go too far this way and not go too that far, but there's just so much power in the moment, that passage.
Yeah, that's I like that, and that just brought up for me. You know, these stories for us now are so potent. And they're like these like stories that we know. Is there like have people studied and come to a conclusion about whether these stories in the present time that they came from were as powerful for these people, or is it something that became powerful for us as they aged, as they became history?
I think they've always been powerful. How they are being powerful is the thing that changes,
Right.
because That's the magic of the moment. That's the magic of Verdandi. That's the manifesting moment,
Hmm.
you know? And so what elements come into those manifesting moments? Those are the choices that we make in any given time of what we're choosing to bring forward into our lives. You know, that's that relationship between volition of like, I will step forward, and trust. I'm going to allow myself to be to trust where I need to step, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think that for me, I feel like it makes a lot of sense that traditional cultures who are in practice with their mythological, with their mythologies, in practice in the sense of, you know, in relationship with dancing, acting, speaking, singing, being, doing together, and in a system, in a coherence together, you know,
Yeah.
we long for that,
Yeah, we do.
and we remember it,
Yeah.
and that's what I believe that people have. I believe that we have had that stronger in the past, and there, and some indigenous cultures have it more strongly, you know, still, but are also struggling to keep it, or and to remember it, you know, and to hold on to it,
Right.
um, and are struggling like mightily, just as we are struggling to regain anything that we can, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
I believe that there were times when we lived for long periods of time, you know, in a rhythm with our lives,
Yeah.
you know. So things are different now because the rhythm has been so disrupted.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, why, one reason why we're just starving even more for those like song lines, right? They call them song lines, like hold on to this like sense of how do we, because it's about meaning, because meaning is like fraying for so many people.
It's true.
And
And
those of us who
connection
have
too.
a,
Community and
pardon?
connection. And community and connection. It's like
Yeah,
meeting and then
yeah,
community and connection, I feel like. And then the you know, the potential to express yourself. You know, it's like
yeah,
that that's what I find is that, you know, in so many other cultures that I've seen, there are opportunities to express yourself, and it's within this boundary of, like you mentioned before about the dance. You know,
yeah,
there's certain constructs, and then you have all the freedom in the world within that construct to
right,
express yourself, and you know that's going to happen during a wedding, a
right,
circumcision,
right,
your, you know, your movement into adulthood, what have
right,
you.
right.
Um, yeah, that's a whole other topic, but it is. It's desperately. We're desperately missing it. And then it's so interesting to see what has been put in its place.
I know,
Yeah, and I would
I
like.
know.
Yeah,
And people are feeling that emptiness and that sense of like meaninglessness, because all of those like Coca-Cola symbols don't do it,
no,
you know,
no. But I
they
have
do
to
it
say,
with,
I've been to handfuls of countries where people had the things that I was missing here, and they felt meaningless. They felt like it was everything was too small. That they were bigger. They were a bigger fish in a small bowl. You know, and that they couldn't live their purpose in their small place. So that I've experienced that quite a bit, where I
right.
thought, you know, and I have a
You have it all. What do you mean?
yeah,
And then,
yeah. I'm like, no,
no,
you don't
I don't.
you don't understand. No, but you can make money in America. I'm like, yeah, but let me tell you how much I
Yeah,
make and then how much I pay. And they're like, you pay
right.
what?
Yeah,
What do you mean? I'm like, I'm not even done yet with the list. You know, like, so yeah, that number's big, but let me just give you the list,
Right,
and you might
right.
think twice about your little village and, your dinky
Uh,
little job weaving. But I have this little note here that is from someone that I listen to, I like, and he suggested maybe we are here to contend with God, and that is the struggle and the point.
and
And I just thought I have it written down because I thought it was so interesting. It's like, because we do that so much, is like, you know if we chose to believe that that was the point, then maybe it would feel easier and not feel like we're going against a point to try to get something. It's like, no, the contending with the whole thing is
yeah,
the hero's journey, the heroine's journey, the
yeah,
you know which kind of wraps it up back to what you were saying, which is like this idea of, instead of going out and fighting this thing, and all of that, that you're like out gathering. I think that's such a cool idea. I definitely want to read
yeah.
about that, and I do think it's yeah, definitely a different, not so much in our consciousness and in our culture to like consider that, but it actually.
Well, and you think about it too, because it's a different relationship with nature, and it's a
Yeah,
relationship with nature that we need to remember, which has to do with that, like daily tending
yeah,
and understanding and coming into relationship with sort of like the minutia of how we are interconnected,
yeah,
and paying attention to those. That's like the mycelium,
yeah,
mycelium is like this network. It's not an arrow, it's a web work, you
yeah,
know and what's going on there is like this incredible communication happening,
yeah,
and we're part of it,
right,
learning how, oh wow, we exist within this like vast, like Indra's net, right? We exist within a vast net, and it's less about achievement, you
right,
know it's
hmm,
achievement is important, and it is, and we go through processes where we're doing is battle some dragons inside and stuff,
yeah,
but there's something else going on here too that has to do with ultimately just belonging,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
and
and
when you talk about your healing roads, you know that's physical and spiritual healing you're talking about.
yeah, and more. It's the allness.
Yeah,
Really just the it's the macro and the micro. It's the inner and the outer. It's the self and the one and the connection, the healthy relationship and connection. So it's really just. I mean, I haven't figured out like a good tagline, but I just, the way I feel about it is like, it's like similar to the all roads lead to Rome. It's like I just feel like
yeah,
all roads lead to or away from health. It's like there's not one road. There's not one, two, three, or four or five ways. There's
yeah,
every direction that we could imagine, and then ones that we can't even imagine. Those are ways for us to connect
yeah,
and heal and get what we need. Whether it's nutrition or your inner child, or
yeah,
better relationship with your mom, or whatever it might be. So
yeah.
yeah, that's
I like it. I've thought about that when I noticed that you were putting that out on Facebook and stuff. I was like, God, that's a really cool image.
nice.
And the fact that it's more than one roads,
Yeah,
it's just embodies diversity, and it also conveys process,
nice.
because roads are, the road goes ever on and on, right?
Yeah, right.
Right? Good
Yeah.
old Bilbo Baggins. Um, that's what that's from. That's
Well,
Tolkien.
I like it.
He has a whole song.
Oh
It's
yeah, I'll have to.
on and on, down the lane. I don't know how it goes. You can find it. I'm sure you can YouTube it or whatever. Somebody sang it in a variety of minutes,
Oh yeah.
But I don't know, there's something interesting about that. Because I imagine myself in relationship to the image of healing roads in a still point that regards all the ways, you know? And it's kind of a choice point in a way, but it's also, I feel like I'm asked to look inside myself of like, what is my, like, again, we're talking about that step. What is my next step in, you
Right.
know, in any one of these given healing roads, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm glad. That's a cool reflection. Thank you. As I'm killing beings, I don't want to. It's a cycle of life.
Exactly.
No, I definitely have like more I want to share with you about it as it develops and everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would love to do this again if and when you have more time. You have,
Oh, sure.
like, you have such an incredible way of presenting the information. And I know you studied it for so long, and it's like, there's just so much there. There's so much there. It's really amazing. So
I like seeing the little
I know I'm like staring at them and they're terrible. I'm like
it's
bit off.
not, they're like, I'm on camera too.
They need their own
They
attention.
have their own healing road going on, even if it's towards the SWAT.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Well,
Yeah, no, that would be really great.
okay. Well, let's definitely
I have to say that I really wish you were part of this the songs of Mother Europe.
yeah, are you doing that?
Oh my God. Yesterday we
Oh,
learned Sami
okay.
yoiking.
Okay. I
And
don't know.
I'm just mind blown about it. I mean, I knew, I was like, I'm really curious. I want to know. I want to know. And they were talking about, there were two people that were presenting, and this totally connects with this. They demonstrated yoiking, which I totally cannot do, I tell you, but it's really like wild sound. You know, it's like kind of Mongolian throat singing, but also kind of like, you know, Swedish cooling, you know, it's like all over the
Okay.
place, high, low, and in between, and
Like a
on and a
percussion.
lot of syllables, and just but the point is, you yoik something or someone. You never yoik yourself, but you give a yoik to someone else. You yoik an event, uh, an animal, um, and what you're doing is you are calling them, calling their frequency into being.
Wow.
So it's like the way they said it is like, you don't paint a picture about a flower. So it's not singing a song about someone. You are painting the flower. You are singing that person. So it's about like that person's energy.
Wow.
And so you're recognizing the energy that they have, and you're singing it into being.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Isn't that amazing?
I love that.
I know.
That kind of it's different, but when you were talking about it, it was just like resonating a bit with like the Gidra, you know, where it's just, it was like you don't do the Gidra for yourself. It's for the community,
Yeah.
and it's Gidra is the person doing the movement. Gidra is the ceremony itself. Gidra is the pot that you turn into a drum. It's all those things, and you know it's something that you if you're doing it, you're doing it as you're giving out, right? You're not
Yes.
doing it for yourself. From my understanding, that's from my understanding of it anyway.
Yeah.
But yoiking, so where is that from?
That's Sami. So it's Northern Europe indigenous people, the reindeer people.
Okay, I was thinking Siberia. Is that different?
It's the Sapmi is the land, so it includes Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland, and part of Russia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, you'll have to tell me more about it. I would have loved to do it. It's just like, how many hours in the day do you have,
I
especially this
I
week?
think she's probably going to continue them. So,
Yeah.
I think I was just it's good. It's just really nice. It's like it's such a blessing to be able to receive that knowledge, even if it's just like a snippet, you
Yeah.
know, from these people from far, far away. One guy is like in his car in northern Norway, like, drove so far to find internet, and here I am talking to you about my thing, you know what I mean? It's like
Oh, wow.
it's so cool,
It is cool. That is the absolute blessing of the technology and the insanity.
I
Is
know exactly.
yeah, these
Yeah.
abilities in these moments are like the blessing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so with that blessing, we will have another one.
Okay. I would
Let me know if you want another one. That would
I
be
do.
lots of fun.
I
Because
want
I love making these connections because this
yeah,
is it too. It's like
yeah,
we're both of us are trying to find ways to make meaning out of our lives and the
yeah,
stories that we live and like what's meaningful to us.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I kiss you.
Mwah.